Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Veronica Gutierrez.
Hi there. How are you today?
I'm well today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. As I was just saying to you before we started recording, I am so excited to talk with you because I just finished your book, As You Look, and it was just absolutely incredible. Would you mind telling me a bit about it for the audience?
Sure. It's my first novel. It's a debut novel. It is about Yolanda Avila, who is a private investigator, a former LAPD cop, who is dealing with the intersection of grief and guilt over her mother's death and the some nascent psychic tendencies, which she very much rejects because she's a private investigator. She should focus on facts. So that's a part of her challenge. She has her godson kidnapped and has to solve that, and then solves a couple of other things, has to solve a couple of other mysteries beyond that, all the time dealing with this psychic thing that won't leave her alone.
Yes. So how did you get the idea for this book? And specifically, I want to talk about the psychic thing because I think that it was a really interesting narrative device throughout it.
Sure. Well, the story itself is something that I had in mind for a long time before I started to write. I've had a lot of different careers, if you will. And this story started when I was working for the city of Los Angeles. I was working for an elected official at the time. And you run across all kinds of things in the different departments in a city, and it's just fascinating. So some of the story came up as a result of my experience there. But the psychic part was something that came up separately, I think. So many things have fallen into place for me in my life. There's so much synchronicity in it. And there's a little bit of juju, if you will, as I call it in the book, in my life and in the life of my family and some of my friends. So it wasn't too difficult to pull that in. But part of what happened here was that as I was outlining, I had to come up with the internal issue that the main character was going to have, and I decided to make it that. So that's how I came up with the psychic angle.
That is so interesting. And I loved, as you were just mentioning earlier, like how you really talk about like the intersection of her guilt and her grief. And there's particularly a powerful moment that I just read, and I do not want to spoil anything, but like in that last, towards the end, I'm going to be as vague as possible, but you examine that a little bit more. And I know that it really hit me when I was reading it. Off of that, I want to say, like, I read a lot of debut books, and this did not feel like a debut novel. Like it felt like you were a very seasoned writer as I was reading it, and in like a great way. And so, as a debut author, what was it like to write this book? And do you have any interest in continuing?
Oh, absolutely. It was so much fun. I definitely want to write a follow-up and maybe even make this a series. And thank you so much for the compliment. But I think much of it is due to, again, some things that happened that were quite serendipitous. When I started to write right after retiring, I read a lot initially. I read so much. But then one of the books I read was by Lisa Cron called Story Genius, which is all about the psychology of pulling people into a story and the human need for story. That's almost a biological need for story, or psychological need for story. And soon after I read her book, she had a webinar or a course that she did through something called Author Accelerator, which is something that Jenny Nash put together to develop book coaches. And they assigned a book coach to you to help you develop the story and all. And I had already gone through a good portion of my story, so I kind of knew where I wanted it to go and what happened within the story. And they helped me develop it. And I was very, very fortunate to have Erin Lindsay McCabe as my book coach. And She was absolutely wonderful and helped me pull it together. And when you go through a process like that, you get through your first draft, and because it's so intense, it's really more like a seventh or eighth draft, I think. So I definitely benefited from that and saved a lot of time.
That is so cool. Can you tell me a bit about what a book coach does, like in terms of supporting you through the writing process?
Sure. Unlike an editor who will go through your book and make suggestions or corrections and all, a book coach will really dig into the why of the story. Why are you doing this? Why would your character do that? And poses a lot of questions that you really need to answer as you develop the story. In this instance, we followed a plan that is called a two-tier outline that Jenny Nash put together. Mm-hmm. And in that instance, you go through the plot, and it doesn't have to be detailed, but you have the plot in mind. And you also have the character's journey in mind, along with the plot. So you're running it in parallel, if you will. And they're great because I don't really do a lot of outlining, but I found that it was very helpful, especially because they kept it short. They really require you to keep it to no more than 2 pages, because if you can't distill it down to 2 pages, then you really don't have the concepts in your mind as solid as they should be. So that was really helpful, and the outline just kind of grew as I wrote, and it took different turns, and chapters moved, and it was very flexible. So it was fun. The creative process for me was very, very fun.
That is so interesting. I've had a lot of different people on here talk about like outlining and like sort of the back end process of writing, and I like it's always so interesting to hear how the process shifts for everyone, because I've had people that have had 100 pages of outlining, like for one book. And I've had people that have had 2 pages or half a page and stuff like that. So I think it's very fascinating to hear about that.
Yeah, it's a very personal thing. It's best to do what works best for you.
Yes, for sure. So in this book, as you were just saying about how you were like looking at like how the characters' arcs go throughout it. So it is a thriller, and you pay a lot of attention to that element, of course, but there's also a lot about the relationships in this book, especially of the lead character and her wife, Sydney. And I loved how you wrote them so much. What sort of things did you do to establish the relationships and the character dynamics for this book?
Well, thank you for noticing that. The positive relationship between the 2 women was very important for me. Lesbian relationships and lesbians in fiction are often very tragic and have, way too much drama. Mm-hmm. And we really have, just boring lives, just like everybody else. But what I really wanted here was to write a positive relationship, an unapologetic love that came through between these 2 women. And the reason for it really is because it's what I have, what I believe I have, and a lot of my friends have. So I didn't want to, be a caricature, have caricatures as opposed to characters. And that's part of why I wanted that story to be that positive. And part of it too is I think when I first conceived of the book, I didn't really see her as being married or having a partner. And when I started writing it, for some reason, it just happened. She wakes up from a dream and there has to be somebody there. So she could discuss that with. So that made it easy in that sense.
Yeah. And I'm a lesbian, and I loved that. Like it felt so important because like what you were saying, it's so much in fiction. It's like, it isn't always a very positive approach. And even if it is like quote unquote good representation, it's still, you don't just see people like living domestically and just having a life and having be kind of like incidental representation. I thought that was really cool to see.
Right. I just wanted it to be just part of who she was.
Yes. I do want to touch on the dreams though, like what you just mentioned that. So could you tell me about writing out the dreams? Like how as an author you used those to kind of hint at future things in the book?
Well, in the in the writing process, I had to come up with something that moved the story forward, and also that moved the character forward. And I thought that the dreams would work just because dreams have had such an impact on my life, especially when I was a kid. I wouldn't have prophetic dreams, if you will, but I would have very insightful dreams, figuring things out. I'd be trying to work something through, and I'd, go to sleep and wake up in the morning with the answer, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that doesn't happen very much anymore, but it used to. And in that sense, it made it easy. And I also wanted to have a character in there who was a curandera, a spiritual healer, who is modeled after my sister's godmother. And dreams for her were very important as well. So in that sense, the dreams helped me, one, move the story forward, two, help develop the character as well, and three, gave the juju, if you will, a little bit of reality, because I tried not to make it over the top. I tried to make it more of a curiosity, and especially because she was fighting it so much. But I also wanted it to be something that she couldn't ignore.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that was really interesting. And I loved like when she's talking with Nina about like how all of that works for her, and like how her family is tied into it. It really draws you in.
Sure. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite scene that you have ever written? And this doesn't even have to be in the book. It could be like in a scrapped project or something.
Let's see. I have several favorite scenes in this book, but the one that I would say is probably my favorite is one that actually didn't quite come in a dream, but was developed more in a dream that I had. And it's the scene where Yolanda goes out on her deck and smokes a cigarillo, and the moonlight is so bright that it's casting shadows out on the deck. And it's something that I see here on our deck with a full moon, or even when there's cloud cover, because the lights from the city reflect back down from the clouds, and you get a lot of shadows out on the deck. It almost doesn't feel like nighttime. But I enjoyed writing that one because it's probably one of the first scenes that I wrote when I was thinking of writing this book. It just came to me, and I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to put this in somewhere. And I did.
So cool. Did you have any other scenes or like characters or something like that came to you in a dream? Very fitting for the nature of this book.
No, I don't think so. I don't. Let me think if there were any others. Just as I noodled the story as it developed, I thought about it a lot, but I don't think I had any other dreams like that. Once I actually started writing it, I did not. That scene came to me years before I actually wrote it.
That is so interesting. I love hearing about writing processes like that, when people like say like, oh, well, this one part came to me here, and it's like kind of, because stuff like that, it sticks with you,
Sure.
So,
it wouldn't leave me alone.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say?
I said it wouldn't leave me alone.
Yes, absolutely. So were there any books or other pieces of media that inspired this?
Oh, there's so many. I love reading mystery novels. They say that you're supposed to write what you know, but I'm not sure if it was Jenny Nash who said that you should write what you like to read.
Yeah.
And then maybe what you know. So I have a little bit of that in this. I love to read mystery novels. I love to read series. So Sarah Paretsky, V.I. Warshawski, who's influenced so many mystery writers, is one of my favorites. Kara Black, who has the Emma Leduc series based in Paris, is another favorite. Who else? There's Tracy Clark, who also bases her character in Chicago. I think you interviewed her not long
I
ago.
did. I was just about to say, I know her. Fantastic author and human.
She's great. Her Cassandra Rains series is wonderful.
Yeah.
Naomi Hirahara, who has the Mass Arai series, also based in Pasadena. So a lot of these mysteries that I really like have a city or community that is almost an additional character.
Yeah.
Cheryl Black, her Charlie Mack series based in Detroit. I call it Detroit Plus because she does more than just Detroit. But so many of them have that. And that's part of what I wanted to do in mine as well. The Boyle Heights neighborhood, the community where I grew up, is where my character grew up. And it's a part of Los Angeles that is not always depicted very positively in the news or in the media. And it is almost like a small town. It was one of the birthplaces of Los Angeles, if you will, with so many communities coming through, so many immigrant communities coming through Boyle Heights. So I wanted to depict that as almost another character.
Yeah. How did your own experiences there impact it? Were there any like Easter eggs or anything that you kind of put in there for locals?
Yeah, there are some. There are some. The dream where she wakes up at 3:23 a.m. Happens very frequently. 3:23. That's significant. It's also the area code for Boyle Heights. So so that's one that locals may catch on.
That is really interesting. I was going to ask you about that because there's a big significance placed on time in the book, and specifically 3:23. And I was curious where that came about.
I originally had it at 3:22, and then I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is very close to the area code. Let's do that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really fun. I love little Easter eggs and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So what was your favorite part of writing this book? Or it can be of writing in general.
I think my favorite part was just being able to write. I wanted to do it for so long, but work and life always got in the way. I had the story in the back of my mind, and I've changed careers quite a bit, and most of them have been very fast-paced, somewhat stressful, with a lot of phone calls. You never really have time to concentrate on things until I practiced law for a couple of years, and I sat down and I was able to write motions. But the law doesn't change all that much. And even though I love my clients and I liked the practice of civil rights litigation, after a while it became a little rote. You're filling in the blanks and the motions because the facts, you're fitting in the facts, but the law itself doesn't change all that much. But I just felt like I needed to go back and write. I loved it so much when I was doing it there. That when I retired, it was the first thing I wanted to do. I took about 4 months and just read as much as I could because I, hadn't gotten around to reading all the books I wanted to, and I read a lot. That's when I came across Lisa Cron's book, and then I decided, okay, now's the time to start writing. So I'm going to do it. And I think the part that I loved the most was being able to immerse myself into a world that was this fiction that allowed me to just explore and develop. So I'd go out on walks and I'd develop characters, I'd develop plot lines, I'd develop scenes, dialogue. And it was so much fun just immersing myself into it.
That is so cool. I have talked with so many people that used to be lawyers or are currently lawyers that are now authors. And I think it's for that exact reason, because there's so much writing involved in that profession that it writing is like writing fiction is like almost a different way to get that creativity out. And I think it's so interesting to hear about. What are some of your methods for sort of developing stuff like that? I know you said you would go out on walks. Were there any other things like that?
I think some of it involved reading. A lot of authors don't read while they're writing. But I enjoy reading, so I'll go in and it'll help get me back into the mood. of writing. I think that part of it has to do with just having the creativity around you, and that certainly helps. I think seeing visual arts and exposing yourself to visual arts and theater and things like that just help put you in the mood to write. You just want to go out and create when you do that. So I think that was part of what helped me.
That is awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. I 100% agree. I know that like personally, I do a lot with music, and whenever I'm like kind of like in a standstill, I just can put on some music and listen for a little bit. And then I feel filled up enough to like let out that creativity.
Right. That's right. I like to write with music in the background. And now I'm writing with some French ballads in the background because even though I speak a little bit of French, I don't always understand what they're saying, so I don't follow along, and I can concentrate on the on the writing instead of the music, but still have that in the background.
That is so smart, because I've heard people do classical music a lot, but like I've never connected to that way. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I like it. I came across it just because I was listening to a station and I thought, oh, I like this music. And if I concentrated really hard, I could understand it. But it takes a lot of concentration on my part. And if I'm writing, I don't have to worry about concentrating on it, and it's just in the background. If it were in English or in Spanish, I'd follow along with the words. And if it's in French, I can't. So it helps.
That's really cool. Yeah. Oh, I actually forgot I wanted to bring something up, because in the book, at a few points, you have characters speaking Spanish to each other. And so, like, how did that decision come in that you wanted to put in another language for parts of it?
Well, I think part of it has to do with authenticity. I think anybody who grows up in Boyle Heights either speaks or understands the language. You can actually live in Boyle Heights your entire life and never speak English. That's how much of a Latino neighborhood it is. And I wanted to make sure that it was authentic in that sense. And, my family, I grew up speaking Spanish. I spoke Spanish before I spoke English. It's my first language. A lot of my friends and family also. So it is natural in the sense of how we speak at home or among friends. So I thought I would put that in.
That is really cool. I love stuff like that in readings. I don't personally speak any Spanish. But the way that you did it, and especially like having certain characters not understand it and have them like kind of translate it for them, I thought was really cool and engaging to read.
I wanted to make sure that everybody understood it. So it was fun doing it.
So you've mentioned now a few times that you're a big reader. What are some of your favorite books?
There's so many. I mean, I do like all of those mystery novels that I mentioned, the Sarah Gretzky's, Tracy Clark, Naomi Hirahara, Cara Black, Cheryl Head, who else? Walter Mosley, Attica Locke. I love her series, but in a lot of different areas too. I mean, I like a lot of different books in different areas and different genres. I like historical fiction quite a bit. There's one book that I give away a lot called Mr. God, This is Anna. Ooh. And it's about a little girl based in a true story, I understand. The author's name is Finn, Fynn, just goes by one name. And it is based on a little girl who's found wandering the docks in London. And it's her special relationship with God and with religion and science and math and nature and just her observations of the world. And she's, I think, 7 years old or so. So it's a wonderful story that I give away to a lot of teenagers and preteens because that's when I saw. In fact, the book almost literally popped out of a shelf at a bookstore in Hollywood that my sister took us to when I found it was a sophomore in high school or so. And I read it and I loved it. And ever since then, it's had an impact on my life. So I give that one away quite a bit.
That is so cool. I just added it to my Goodreads as you were saying that, because it sounds really interesting.
It's a really cool book.
Mm. Have there been any other books like that have kind of like influenced your life in any way?
So that one was one. I would think Brenda Euland's If You Want to Write. Brenda Euland writes about writing among the average person, if you will. I believe she was teaching a writing class, and she had folks from all walks of life taking the class. And she describes what their experience was like, what their observations were, and what some of her friends' observations were in writing. And I go back to that book, at least the first part of it, every once in a while when I haven't felt the mood to write, or when I haven't been able to get into my stories, I'll go back and I'll read that, and it helps.
That's awesome. I will definitely be checking that one out. Yeah, well, you know what? Just thank you so much for coming on today. This was a really great time to talk with you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate your doing this.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I just have one last question, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, I am starting to work on a sequel for As You Look. I don't have a title yet. I'm doing some research on it, and it's going to focus again in the Boyle Heights area, and will probably highlight the Japanese immigrant experience in Boyle Heights, because the Japanese were among those who came through Boyle Heights, and especially around World War II, or even before, they weren't allowed to own property. So a lot of them had property in the names of their children who were U.S. born. So I think that I'm going to have a character like that in it. I also will have probably an undocumented character in it. And it'll be another mystery that Yolanda Avila needs to solve in the Boyle Heights area.
Awesome. Well, I cannot wait to read it once it comes out. Everyone go check out As You Look and anything to come, right? For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Veronica Gutierrez.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast, and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.